We're going to lead off this hour with the very latest in the war between Israel and Hamas. U.S. President Joe Biden is raising hopes for a ceasefire agreement. We'll have his remarks from a late-night TV appearance in just a moment. But we're going to begin the hour with some reaction from inside Gaza.
اتفاق حسب الإطار المتوافق عليه حاليا في باريس إنه يتم وقف إطلاق النار لأنه حجم الدمار رهيب جدا في قطاع غزة والمدنيين هم النسبة الأكبر من الضحايا وبالتالي نتمنى إنه يكون هناك وقف لإطلاق النار.
This is video into us this morning from Rafah, and that is the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike. The man in the wheelchair says he was pulled from the rubble by first responders. The latest UN report says there have been heavy bombardments around the Gaza Strip and that Hamas and other armed Palestinian groups are retaliating with rocket fire. But the most intense fighting remains focused to the north of Rafah. Without a ceasefire agreement, an Israeli ground offensive is expected to move into that city in the south early next month. Abby Kukadasan has our coverage this hour. Let's begin, Abby, with what the U.S. president said in that late-night TV appearance last night.
Heather, before that, he said there could be a ceasefire starting on Monday. He says they're close to a deal. Close, but not there yet. But we are hearing comments from almost all the other actors involved in these negotiations this morning, and his comments may have oversold the progress here. He did comment further on Seth Meyers' show on NBC last night, as you said. Here's what he said about a possible pause in fighting and moving towards a two-state solution.
You got at least a principle agreement. There will be a ceasefire while that takes place. Ramadan's coming up, and there's been an agreement by the Israelis that they would not engage in activities during Ramadan as well, in order to give us time to get all the hostages out. That gives us time to begin to move in directions that a lot of Arab countries are prepared to move in.
A Qatari foreign ministry spokesperson says they're optimistic, but there's no agreement on elements linked to a ceasefire. Here's what he had to say just a short while ago.
If there was an agreement, you'd see me here in a more cheer attitude. But till now, we don't have an agreement, yes, and we are still working on the negotiations.
And Israel's Channel 12 is citing an unnamed senior Israeli official who asked that they don't really understand Biden's comments, wondering what Biden's optimism is based on. Now, we know this draft proposal is now in the hands of Hamas. The proposal was worked out in Paris, which included Israeli officials. Hamas says Biden's comments are premature. Now, previously, Hamas had demanded that the IDF fully withdraw from Gaza and that the war ends with a ceasefire deal. There are reports now that Hamas has softened its stance on those key demands. But again, this has not been confirmed. And these demands were called non-starters for Israel in recent weeks. So certainly gaps very wide and no signs right now that they've narrowed, except from a very optimistic U.S. president, Heather.
And Abby, in terms of what they are discussing and negotiating, we do know that some of the details from the draft of the ceasefire proposal are being reported today. There is, as expected, that exchange of Israeli hostages in Gaza for Palestinians being detained in Israel. That's part of what we know. What else do we have as far as specifics?
Yeah, some of the details are emerging through Reuters news agency. They're reporting that this proposal includes a 40-day pause, an exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian detainees. So 10 Palestinian detainees for one Israeli hostage. That's the ratio. And there's also included in that 500 aid trucks a day to enter Gaza. As we know, aid agencies have been calling for any kind of pause in fighting. They say, we don't care what you call it, but the fighting needs to stop so that aid can enter the enclave. We know that in recent days, the Jordanian army airdropped aid across Gaza in recent days. The King of Jordan has now spoken to the U.S. aid chief, Samantha Power, telling her that aid needs to double for Gaza to avoid a further deterioration of the situation. But again, a lot of eyes on Rafah right now with the threat of a possible IDF ground offensive. We know on Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said it's happening even if all the hostages hostages are released. He said his war cabinet does have an evacuation plan now in hand to move the 1.4 million Palestinians out of Rafah. It has not been made public. We also know the United States has repeatedly said the displacement of Palestinians is unacceptable. It was calling for restraint when it came to ground troops entering Rafah. But have a listen to what Joe Biden said on the show about that.
Israel has slowed down the attacks in Rafah. They have to, and they've made a commitment to me. They're going to see to it that there's ability to evacuate significant portions of Rafah before they go and take out the remainder of Hamas. But it's a process.
The U.S. did veto another UN Security Council ceasefire resolution last week, saying that would hinder this deal. But again, contradictory comments emerging this morning, Heather, on that possible agreement.
Thank you, Abby.